Hello, and welcome to our next session, which is on diversifying the regional gas market, alternative gas routes, LNG, and biomethane. I have a very interesting panel today. We are focusing a lot on transmission. As a journalist, I've covered the issue of diversification has come up many times before. With trying to reduce the reliance on Russia. I mean, with the gas crisis in 2006 and 2009, Europe is in a much better position now with interconnectors, with trying to boost energy security. But now with the shock of the war in Ukraine, there is an increased need to do something urgently to cover Europe's energy needs, increase energy security, and of course, within the whole climate crisis, to be able to address all and decarbonization. And we had a lot of speakers talk about Repower EU already. My keynote speaker is James Watson. He's Secretary General from Eurogas in Belgium, and he's going to discuss all these issues that in the context of the war, the impact of the war in Ukraine, and the impact that it has on policy, including Repower EU. James, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garopoulos. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm very happy to contribute to this excellent conference that has been put together. My great thanks to Kostas and all the people at IIIa. Indeed, we are living in very unusual and challenging times. I think I can say on behalf of Eurogas, we are the association of the midstream and downstream, so wholesale, retail and distribution markets. I think we can say very honestly, we've never really had a time like it. Last year, we had the Fit for 55 legislative package come out. This is alongside the closure of the 10E and the taxonomy, which is still rumbling on, as you know. And also in December, we had the launch of the gas package, the gas and hydrogen package, one should say. And this is really already a huge amount of legislative work. Then, of course, following the 24th February and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have also seen the Repower EU ideas, as there are really only ideas with very few concrete legislative proposals in them, come forth. The point is, this has been probably the most busy time the sector has had, at least on a policy front, for decades. And indeed, that does mean that we are very much stretched in Eurogas, but we are covering all bases as best as we can. I think for today, I understand a lot of people already talked about Repower EU. What I would like to do, therefore, is reflect a little bit on some of the elements of Repower EU that are perhaps more relevant from our point of view in Eurogas. We're currently taking 155 billion cubic meters of gas from Russia, and the European Commission has said that by 2027 we don't want to have that gas anymore. This is all understandable. We fully support the direction of diversification. We fully support Ukraine, its sovereignty, and indeed we stand with our colleagues in Naftogaz of Ukraine against Russian aggression. Nevertheless, 155 BCM of Russian gas is set to disappear in just 5 years. Now, when you look at Repower EU, you will see that there is therefore a kind of assumption that quite a lot of gas would disappear in total, not just Russian gas. And I think this is somehow not necessarily the right way of thinking about how the future 5 years will evolve. And I can say that quite comfortably because we also worked out that in the Repower EU forecasts for gas consumption in 2030, an important part was missing. And that is the 50 billion cubic meters that the European Commission has signed up to with the White House for United States LNG suppliers to deliver to the EU by 2030. And that's actually a very significant move, I think. What it tells you is that the European Commission is also aware of the fact they need natural gas. The natural gas is still absolutely vital to delivering the energy transition. In Eurogas, we've welcomed this move towards the US. We do believe that it's important that we create as much opportunities as possible with like-minded countries. And I think that if we can actually achieve the 50 BCM of LNG from the US, we'll have gone a long way to helping to diversify our sources and create the energy security we crave. We have learned something from the invasion of Ukraine, and that is that over-dependency is not a good idea. On Tuesday, I was lucky enough to be also with Bojana, who's with me in the room, and around about 40 industry CEOs, executive vice presidents and vice presidents, discussing with the European Commission what we think needs to happen. And what I can say is that if we're going to meet the 50 BCM of extra LNG from the US, what we have to do is remember that there are certain specific elements that we have to adhere to. The first is that climate ambitions must be upheld. We need to have the cleanest gas possible delivered from the US. And that means we need to have the methane regulation upheld. We also need to see the US administration bringing forward a pragmatic approach to methane regulations that should be as close to the European approach as possible, so that we have the ability to compare. And I think that is very important. We mustn't forget the climate within the need to increase our security of supply. I think we also recognize that we're going to have additional investments in LNG infrastructure. We are changing the way we think of gas. The east to west flow is over, and that means we have to look at more west to east and south to north flows. And I think that it's really important that we therefore have the right policies and the right financing policies. EIB, EBRD, these are definitely institutions that need to rethink the way that they have financed gas. And we need to make sure that we're giving as much certainty and security to the private financiers so that they also invest money. I think that this will be a big undertaking. We'll need a sort of Marshall Plan to support the LNG infrastructure, and we shouldn't underestimate the amount of effort that needs to be done today. And I will say that it needs to be done today, not tomorrow. If we're going to have those LNG volumes, we cannot pussyfoot and dither. We need to start building things today. We need to start signing contracts today. And that means we need that certainty as soon as possible. And of course, European government officials need to also give the right signals and give the right indications in policy that they are going to support. And one of the mechanisms to do that is to recognize that we're going to have long-term contracts once again. We are, of course, in favor of market instruments. We are not against spot pricing, but we have to be free as an industry to negotiate the terms that will ensure the right amount of gas comes at the right time for European consumers. And therefore, long-term contracts with the US will be part of that equation. Otherwise, that gas will simply go to China. I think that's really a strong message that I would give you today. I think we also need to make sure that we have flagship projects, that the US administrations and the EU administrations work together with the industry to identify projects that are needed to be built as fast as possible. In terms of the climate, I think we'd also say that we do believe that any new installations on LNG that we do look at should be as hydrogen ready as possible. And that would also apply to the pipes that we will need to connect those facilities to the European grid. My final point in relation to the LNG question is also a very simple one. We can look at joint purchasing, but in fact, in the last 5 months of this year, we've doubled the amount of LNG coming from the US simply through market activities. Now, Eurogas is not necessarily fully against joint purchasing, but it must be done on a voluntary basis, and the European Commission's role must be limited to creating the framework conditions for the industry to negotiate the contracts to bring the LNG that we want here. Everything I've said is a huge undertaking, and it's also a massive undertaking in a short period of time. And that means we need the right political signals and not the wrong political signals. And it certainly does not help when senior members of the European Commission doubt the viability of natural gas as an energy transition fuel, as some have done in recent weeks and months. And I think they will have to give a better rhetoric to explain why we need to build LNG infrastructure as we diversify away from Russian gas as a response to the aggression in Ukraine. Therefore, there needs to be consistency. And I don't know how much you've talked about REPowerEU, but it's clear that there is a lack of consistency between what is put there and between what is agreed between EU and US governments. This lack of consistency is confusing, and we need to move beyond it. To be more positive, because we've also been asked to speak about biomethane, we'll also say that at least they got this right. Eurogas, also our colleagues in GIE, have called for a long time for binding targets for volumes of biomethane to be set in the EU by 2030. This is something that finally has been achieved. I can assure you we were told at the end of 2021 that it would never happen. And the war in Ukraine has apparently changed the mind of the Commission, so they have put forward those targets. Fully support the 35 billion cubic meter target. It's fully in line with Eurogas's predictions of what should be possible by 2030. Nevertheless, we must also regret that it took a war to give the right signals to invest in the gases that we'll need for the future. On green hydrogen, and I know it's not part of this debate, but I will mention it, 20 million tons is a massive ambition. It really is. And we don't have infrastructure to do it. And yet there is nothing within REPowerEU that explains where this infrastructure will come from to import 10 million tons of green hydrogen. So whilst we can cautiously say, yes, this is ambitious, this is sort of going in the right direction, it's not enough to be given a bone. An industry needs meat on a bone. And unfortunately, the European Commission have not given us any meat. We will have to see, together with our colleagues in the industry associations, and come to a point of agreement, I believe, to ask for what we need. But I would think that if you're going to have 10 million tons of green hydrogen imported by 2030, we ought to be building LH2 terminals as well today to make that possible. I think I'll wrap up with that point and just remind everybody that outside of the US LNG elements, which perhaps have been overlooked in REPowerEU, we're also keen to see piped gas increased in your area, in Greece. And we have had meetings with TAP to talk about the possibility of how fast they can speed up the supply of the extra 10 BCM, which should be possible from 2025, so that in fact it's a 20 BCM line. That is important. We do see the extra pipe as something that is useful. And also, knowing that you have Romania in Southeast Europe, we're also looking to domestic production. We think domestic production will also be important as a different source, a different supply route, if you will, but surely one that somebody like Bulgaria could hope to also rely on, should Romania have enough surplus gas to pass to its neighbour. Security of supply has become top agenda for many parts of the European Commission, and indeed we recognise that, but we also recognise the need to maintain the efforts to deliver the climate change agenda. And that is why, once again, we cannot understand why REPowerEU is destroying 24 billion cubic meters of demand of natural gas by keeping coal burning to 2030. This does not make sense, Mr. Garopoulos, and we will hope for better and clearer signals than the ones we have received so far to make the objectives that have been laid down in things like the EU-US energy security task force a reality. Thanks very much for inviting me today. I'm really sorry because I have to also leave very shortly, but I do understand it's been a very, very good conference, and indeed that always leads to more discussion and time overrunning. Thank you again for the invitation. I hope you found what I said somehow provocative yet useful.
Great. Thank you, James, very much for this very informative overview. You touched base on all the key elements about how the EU can try to diversify its sources, but also you address some important problems, like you mentioned with like hydrogen and how the infrastructure is not still there. Before you go, I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask you a question because I know you have to run. You mentioned like the possibly having long-term contracts with the US, and that would of course be better for the market. But we're still talking about 15 BCM. If Europe seriously needs to get to diversify away from Russia, and we're going to mention some other projects about my next speaker, about you mentioned the IGB, and previous speakers mentioned about the agreement yesterday between Israel, Egypt, and the European Union. But would those projects suffice for to have a realistic independence from Russia, and given that it's such a major producer to Europe soon?
Yeah, I think that in the end we will need all of the projects that we can imagine, and we'll need partners beyond the US. We'll also need our partners in the Middle East, and we'll also need partners in Africa, and possibly even as far away as Asia, at least for LNG. For pipes, of course, there are possibilities in the East Med. I've seen Tim McVie, the spokesperson for Commissioner Kadri Simpson, speak and defend the fact that the East Med is still on the Projects of Common Interest list,
yeah, I saw
the PCI list, as you call it. And indeed, that means the European Commission is still committed to extra and new pipeline projects. We will hope to squeeze a bit more out of the Norwegians, but it will be BCM handfuls. We hope for TAP to give us another 10 BCM. I believe it's possible. There will have to be a market test. Given the situation, I don't understand how there could possibly be any problem with the market. I think we will need it to replace the Russian gas. And domestic production shouldn't be overlooked. I was told by one of our members that in the North Sea, you've still got about 200 BCM potential. That's quite a massive amount of gas. Look, okay, we have to accept something else, Mr. Garopoulos. All of this is a lot more expensive than Russian gas, but that is the new normal. So my view would be that we probably have enough between domestic production, between pipe sources, between LNG sources to fill the hole that we will need to fill. The question will be partly how quickly can we do it and what the pressure to how quickly will be, i.e. how long will the Russian gas stay turned on? And then I think secondly, the other major constraint will be how do we persuade financiers to put money into projects if the rhetoric from the European Commission is, well, we only want this for 5 or 10 years. I'm sorry, but that won't cut it, because they know that if you build a pipe or an LNG terminal, you need 20 to 30 to 40 years for the depreciation. And that's going to take, I would say, a concerted effort to make sure the rhetoric is right, that the political statements are correct, to get the financing in there to allow us to utilize the domestic resources, to allow us to get that LNG from all over the world, and to allow us ultimately to show that we can deliver a diversified supply of natural gas that is energy secure.
Great. James Watson, Secretary General from Eurogas. Thanks so much. You gave me a good pass to my next panelist, George Polychroniou, because you mentioned, the IGB, you mentioned, gas coming in from the East Med pipeline. I mean, I saw that study too that said that in addition to the statements from the Commission yesterday. George Polychroniou, he's Executive Director, Strategy and Business Development from DEPA in Greece. George, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kostis. We are talking today about diversification of gas markets, especially for our area in Southeast Europe. Diversification of natural gas sources and routes has been a European priority for over 20 years, as we know. Current geopolitical situation clearly makes this more urgent. So what is Europe doing to address this challenge? We have heard a lot previously regarding REPowerEU. The main target, as we heard, of REPowerEU is to reduce substantially and to eliminate, if possible, Russian gas imports in the coming years. Personally, I remain a little bit skeptical about how feasible is this target, especially in the very short term. And we see how fragile is the European market, especially having in mind that just the incident in Texas just a few days ago, together with, by coincidence, I don't think so, the reduction of gas deliveries from Gazprom export in the last couple of days have resulted in an increase of gas price from $80 from 80 euros per million per megawatt hour to around 135 just an hour ago. So we understand how difficult it is to deal with those situations and especially have plans, create plans, and the most challenging is to realize the plans, not to make the plans. Anyway, the situation is this, and we have to deal with this situation. What we can do in the short term in order to deal with this challenge to reduce substantially Russian gas in Europe. There are not many options, as we know. James Watson mentioned possibilities. The possibility of increasing gas deliveries from Norway is minimal. North Africa also possibility to increase supply from North Africa is also limited. TAP can increase, as we heard, by around 10 BCM supply of Europe, and this is a feasible possibility, feasible option, but in the coming years, not in the very short term. Then what's left? LNG, and LNG is the main source of diversification in Europe. We heard about 15 BCM, which are going to come additionally this year. We heard also about 50 BCM in the coming years, but as James Watson also mentioned, this will require long-term contracts because in order to bring 50 BCM additionally from United States, this will require additional investments, and additional investments under the uncertainty which is created with the new policy of reducing European gas demand. This will reasonably require longer-term commitments. This is also a challenge, and we have to remember always that Europe is not the main LNG importer. If I remember well the figures, from around 520 BCM of LNG, which is the international LNG trade in 2021, Europe, together with UK, absorbed about 20% of this quantity. In order to have the certainty of having LNG in Europe, we have to remember that long-term contracts are very likely necessary from the quantity of around 80 BCM which came into Europe in the form of LNG in 2021, which normally will be increased in 2022. Just 60 BCM are committed. For the rest, Europe has to compete with other buyers in the world, and we have to remember that more than 50% of LNG world trade is referring to Asia, to China, Korea, and Japan. The situation is favorable right now in Europe because China is not absorbing what it can absorb. If we come back to our area, Southeast Europe and our country, I have to say that we are in a good position in terms of diversification of supply sources and routes and infrastructure. We have a quite flexible gas sector in Greece. Just an example, we had LNG deliveries last year, which was around 1/3 of the consumption of the demand, In the first 5 months of 2022, the contribution of LNG in Greece was around 50%, very important increase. And through Greece, we have also served needs from Bulgaria after the interruption of gas deliveries to Bulgaria from Gazprom export. We have, as company, as DEPA Commercial, a well-diversified portfolio, including long-term contracts, not only with Gazprom, but also from AGSE, the Azeri gas. We have also some deliveries from Turkey. We have also deliveries in long-term contracts from Sonatrach, and also we buy gas in the spot market as everybody. Also, we contribute through our participation as DEPA Commercial in important infrastructure projects, and I think that Greece can become a very important hub for bringing gas not only to South and Southeast Europe, but also to Europe generally, through the infrastructure which is constructed. And I'm referring now to the Alexandroupolis FSRU, which has started to be constructed, and it will be ready by the end of 2023. It will be the second LNG terminal after the very important LNG terminal of Revithoussa. It will increase not only the flexibility of the gas sector in Greece, but also the possibility of bringing additional quantities of LNG to our area. DEPA Commercial is participating by 20% in the asset company of the Alexandroupolis FSRU. And we have also a long-term commitment, reserve capacity in both Alexandroupolis FSRU and the IGB pipeline, which will be ready to start operation in the coming couple of months. So we will have very soon a very substantial infrastructure which will enable Greece's target to become a hub in the region. And don't forget that, as we heard also from James Watson from Eurogas, that diversification is not only diversification in terms of natural gas sources and infrastructure, but we have to have in mind that diversification will come in the future through hydrogen, through biomethane, through synthetic fuels. We are ready as DEPA, and we have included in our strategy, and we have included also in our strategic initiatives, movements and investments in this direction, creation of a portfolio of renewable power production, and investments in the fields of hydrogen and biomethane. So this is from my side. Thanks.
Yeah, George, James mentioned earlier that the infrastructure is not there yet for hydrogen. I mean, is it possible for the gas infrastructure to be used in Greece, for example, in the future for hydrogen as well?
The existing infrastructure, not directly. Of course, the existing infrastructure can receive up to proportion, up to a maximum, a share of hydrogen mixed with natural gas. But I know from DESFA, and I think that in the next panel there will be presentation from DESFA. I think that all new infrastructure in Greece will be compatible with 100% ready for hydrogen use. So, and all new infrastructure, for instance, West Macedonia pipeline, which will be an addition to our system, to our national gas system, will be also foreseen to be to absorb, to receive hydrogen.
Okay, great. That's a nice passage to my next panelist, Ms. Bojana Achowski. She's the Secretary General from Gas Infrastructure Europe, the GIE, also in Brussels. We heard from James earlier. Bojana, I know you're an expert also on the carbonization of terminals, long-term engagements for LNG. Bojana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation to IIIa, of course. I'm representing an association which is based in Brussels, and we have 67 members from all European countries. We represent all storage operators, TSO operators, and also LNG terminal operators in Europe. Indeed, we are working very closely with Eurogas, and we are going to be very much aligned on the messages in relation to LNG, indeed, which will be one of the focus of what I would like to tell you today. So basically, I will start probably with the prices, because many people were talking today about REPowerEU, about diversification, about the Green Deal. But indeed, prices are something that are crucial for all of us. First of all, as citizens, because they had a serious impact, let's say, on our lifestyle. And second, as representative of a key industry, indeed, because what we need really right now is to have a very clear business plan. This is something that are kind of a clear guidelines in all the pathways we need to follow here, because on one hand you have the very important question about diversification, because indeed and decarbonization, because indeed the process with the climate are something that we all have a sympathy as a citizens. But on the other hand, it's also about the economy, right? Because we are finding ourselves in such a deep crisis, and then all those elements needs to be considered very, very properly. But here is the good news, and the good news is that we are having LNG, indeed, because actually the terminals can help to support the both perspectives, so economical and also the climate perspective, because you know, this is also come on the top of the fact that LNG is also very well contributing to security of supply. And indeed, security of supply is also one of the topics which came very up on the agenda nowadays. So very briefly about REPowerEU plan. I'm not going to talk about the plan per se, because we see people who are very much in depth explaining about the role of this plan that was put. Want to emphasize, indeed, we need to consider that that was a plan that is taken into consideration on the times of crisis, right? So there's a really proposals on long term, and let's say short-term perspective. Right. So it's quite complicated really to orient what would be the very clear scenarios in these regards. So of course the proper reading on that is that how we are going to prepare for the next winter. And what I can tell you that for us as an infrastructure, this is a very big challenge, of course, as many other pillars of the industry per se from energy sector. Because of course what the Commission is putting forward is extremely ambitious, and it's a huge challenge. So basically with the gas infrastructure, what we are having today, we cannot actually manage all the volumes that we are hearing that are requested in the plan. So there will be really a drastic efforts from our sides to prepare the infrastructure to manage more and really to provide such kind of necessary volumes in a very sustainable let's say, and resilient, but on the same time decarbonized perspective, because everything needs to be considered together. So one of the message I would like to be heard, and especially from the policymakers that we are trying to very much engage also together with the other European stakeholders, is that the financial and legislative support, when we're talking also including the fast track permitting, here it's a key, and they must to take closer all these elements together for the industry to make sure that we are properly prepared for such kind of challenge. So of course, we've heard also many people who are talking about infrastructure here, that there are really this kind of fast changes needs, because indeed all the infrastructure are managed in a way, and it was structured in a way that we were having flows from east to west, and now very quickly we need to prepare for, let's say, a vice versa. So besides that, the increased needs for LNG capacities really also required this kind of specific pipeline system to also enable the volumes for LNG to flow through Europe. So new transmission capacity investments are therefore needed. And we were talking about, so a colleague was actually also mentioning taxonomy, which is rather problematic in this perspective because they need to, so the policymakers really need to understand that there are specific bottlenecks in the infrastructure. So as we agreed that we are going to talk about, let's say, decarbonization of the LNG terminals, let's very, very briefly just mention that, of course, one of the things that we are knowing today is that LNG offers an immediate greenhouse gas reduction to 23%, which is already quite a good number. So this is actually the pathway that we are seeing forward. So in the future, they will be able to also implement, so the terminals, the incremental pathways to, let's say, having such kind of net zero emissions processes. And this could happen through the use of bio-LNG and also synthetic LNG. So those are the tools. So bio-LNG, it's really a source which is the good thing. It's with this scenario is that bio-LNG is very much scalable. It's available and also cost effective and competitive. So the specifics of renewable synthetic LNG is that the availability that you can have on that is very much dependent on renewables, and basically the electrolysis capacity, which let's say 80% of its cost depends also on the hydrogen production. So hydrogen was also something that was mentioned a couple of times. Probably the question about the infrastructure was also good to GIE. When we talk about decarbonization activities of the terminal, you can see here the status where we have the bunkering available and also those which are under development in Europe. But mostly on that slide, I would like to focus because 3 years ago, GIE and our members were requested by the European Commission really to showcase on what kind of way we can decarbonize our facilities and what kind of best use, let's say, we can have in this perspective. So we were presenting that, but I would say that 3 years later, we have much more information about that. And I would like to briefly go through, let's say, this pathways that you can see how you can greener the upstream and the downstream. So you have a different hydrogen carriers, but let's say technology neutrality is very much important for us, and it's a message that we always like to put forward. So what we know today in relation to the decarbonization is that of course, as I mentioned, the terminals can import easily synthetic and biomethane. So this is really a straightforward approach that can be done today. So there it is, one specific possibility that you have already put place nowadays. So the synthetic methane is also a hydrogen carrier. This is important to be mentioned. And the business cases are becoming really better and better. So we are improving in these regards. So we see really projects in this perspective that can produce sufficient volume in these regards of green methane, which are coming from Oman, from Middle East, Egypt, Morocco, Australia, and also Chile. So basically, the circular economy, when we talk about CO2 reduction emissions, is improving really rapidly, which is a very good signal. The second thing is that we have a much better overview of the technical compatibility between the current LNG installation and ammonia. Ammonia was also mentioned a couple of times. So what we know is that, of course, we can use all the fixed parts of the LNG, and we can receive around 70%. So in this case, you only need compressors and pumps to be changed, but it's about 20% of the terminal. So that's also a kind of a positive result to share. So what you need is really to build close to the terminal a plant to crack ammonia and to track the hydrogen out. So the regasification of hydrogen remains, let's say, the most difficult scenario, although that indeed hydrogen is one of the topics which are very rangely discussed. This is really the most remote scenario when we talk here about LNG. So the liquid hydrogen is really a rocket science. It really is. Because the only application of liquid hydrogen is a rocket fuel. It is the only large-scale, let's say, application of liquid hydrogen. So as I said, this is really a remote scenario. And the last one on the perspectives of such kind of decarbonization is that lock-in is definitely something that we do not really would like to hear as an argument, because basically what it should not be taken into consideration and into account is that when you lock in now for additional, let's say, regasification volumes. So based off all the, let's say, situation that we are seeing nowadays, security of supply reasons that LNG terminals definitely are playing a very big role, and also the diversification possibilities which are seen, because indeed nowadays we can see that the world is opening up after COVID, of course. We do expect, and we already see that the tourism is going back after COVID, so there will be much more also need for the ships, cruise ships, also to use in this perspective. So there is a lot of demand indeed, and interest. So basically, these are the important three messages I would like to put forward when we talk about LNG, which is very much close to the discussion what we had with James, as we were having this meeting indeed in Tuesday, which he mentioned. So everything is about the long-term contracts, and we need to do the things properly here, and the policymakers needs to have a very proper understanding what that's supposed to mean, because the main challenge nowadays is indeed to find an LNG and to have it to Europe. So as we know, and so many people were talking about this, 150 BCM of Russian gas that Europe actually is looking to substitute nowadays, right? This is 1/3 of the global trade LNG. So it's not going to happen if we do not have a long-term agreement arrangements, because the largest part of the global LNG trade is really bound of the destination-specific contracts, which are very much related to long-term agreements. Two examples in this regards. Let's start with Qatar, because Qatar indeed is a key player when we talk about LNG. So Qatar is having a same destination differences between Asia and Europe, so they can decide themselves where to go. But 80% of the LNG is sold to Asia. Why? Because they have indeed long-term arrangements. Then the second thought in this perspective is, of course, US. US is also an interesting key player when we talk about that. So they're not always. I mean, the US is not always bound with, let's say, long-term arrangements, but they have a specific, because their, let's say, complexity is that the liquefaction capacity is actually mixed out. So if you want to have more LNG, that means you need to liquefy it more. And because behind this, it's actually more private financed project, they really need to have a signal of being bankable. And to be bankable, of course, you need to have a long-term arrangement. So these are the things in this regard. So we also need to ensure a fast track approval, let's say, because because there is a bottleneck in the supply. And there is still an infrastructure that is missing when we talk about LNG. So there is a certain need, the member states and also the governments, to recognize that there is a need to complete, let's say, such kind of missing infrastructure. So the quick approval processes on these projects, they need to understand that there should be something more beyond the business as usual. And then indeed, in these regards, we see a very good examples coming from Germany when we talk about missing infrastructure. And then the last thing is really to ensure a proper interconnectivity, because if you want to get the maximum, let's say, of the import through LNG terminals, it is really important to make an efficient, let's say, distributed, let's say, through the continent. But you need to have a proper access to the consumer's area, especially when we talk about local storages. So there is a need, again, to have a role for the governments to increase the interconnectivity and the borders, and to have such kind of cell of incremental capacity.
Thanks so much, Bojana. And we'll discuss it a little bit further if there are any questions. But the questions, the issues here is to move those projects as quickly as possible. So when when hydrogen, for example, is ripe and ready, the infrastructure is there, and it seems like also decarbonization is a way, one of the ways also to lead to diversification at the same time, protect the climate. My next panelist, Pantelis Voyagis, he's an expert on climate policy. I think he knows. And he's the executive director on administrative services and corporate governance division of EDA Attikis, Greece. Pantelis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kostis. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Clearly, actually, we have been witnessing during the past few months that the most fundamental pillar of the energy union, which is energy security, has not yet been achieved, which means that policymakers should strive to further develop a policy and legal framework which will accommodate the needs for the future generations in terms of establishing energy security and security of energy supply. The war in Ukraine and the high gas prices in Europe is a key indicator to this end. So the EU must set the proper grounds at a policy level to eliminate the energy dependency from Russia. In my view, Repower EU is just a first step towards this end. Evidently, and following the remarks from Professor Kapros and the outcome of Prime's model, natural gas will still play a crucial role over this decade in the European energy mix, and in particular, through the energy transition process, despite the current price adversities. To this end, it is crucial to move forward to diversification of natural gas sources through the increase of LNG imports, which is actually happening, but actually the EU needs more LNG, and in order to facilitate the imports of additional LNG cargoes, we need to pay specific attention and focus on further enhancing storage infrastructure. In my view, an action of strategic importance, of much strategic importance, I believe, will be the tighter cooperation between DSOs and TSOs in the gas sector. Such cooperation will eventually lead to synergies in the development of networks, distribution and transmission networks. It will also bring forward mutually dependent development plans between the DSOs and the TSOs in the natural gas sector. Also, it would lead to joint undertakings in the development of new infrastructure which will eventually accommodate renewable gases as well as green hydrogen, and also without excluding storage, which is another issue which must be resolved in the short term. And all this will eventually lead to reduction of transmission and distribution tariffs, which will be definitely for the benefit of end consumers. Also, from the regulatory point of view, an important step will be the adoption of clear, solid, and concise regulatory framework, which will facilitate the development and deployment of renewable gases and green hydrogen, as well as gas storage infrastructure. I think it's pretty obvious that a solid and clear regulatory environment will stimulate the investors' interest and create new opportunities. Apart from the regulatory framework, it's also of much importance to safeguard a healthy and viable investment environment through the provision of grants, funding, and incentives towards new infrastructure and towards the support of the targets of REPowerEU, the Fit for 55, and the full decarbonization of the energy sector by 2050. So the message, the clear message is to convey is that there will be no diversification of the natural gas market without incentivization for investors. So the diversification of regional gas market can be accomplished, and I'm using terms starting from the letter D. First, the deployment of renewable gases and storage, which is crucial. The diversification of energy sources by placing specific emphasis on LNG. Decarbonization of processes and activities in the DSOs and TSOs. Digitalization of infrastructure and services. That's the way forward. And of course, all this combined with the drastic synergies among TSOs and DSOs, which will bring definite benefits to end consumers and lead to a sustainable energy market. And definitely, it will move the market closer to the accomplishment of the energy and climate targets. That will be all from me.
Thanks so much, Padelis. And the one topic also of this session is about biomethane, and there's no better person to talk about it than Theodore Terzopoulos. He's the head of strategies and administration division of DEDA in Greece and chairman of Vienna's Natural Gas Committee. Theodore, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kostis. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Although I've been working for the last 33 years in the gas sector, tonight I would like to describe and to refer to the initiatives and the achievements of my company, the company I work for, DEDA, which is a gas distribution operator, in the field of biomethane and hydrogen, which are for us are the renewable gases. You may be wondering why a gas distribution operator is interested and engaged in the biomethane and hydrogen distribution. And the explanation, to my opinion, is quite easy. Let me say this. We in DEDA, we realized at a very early stage that almost all the guidelines, the decisions, and the directives coming out from the European Commission and the other institution of European Union were in favor to the promotion of the renewable gases and at the expense of natural gas. At the same time, DEDA was about to start the construction of new gas distribution networks in 34 cities in Greece. This extension of gas network represents a huge project of a budget of about €500 million, and with the expectation that those new gas networks should be in operation by the end of 2023. As a matter of fact, we understand that the sustainability of our investment was at risk because of if we stuck on the idea and the procedure to distribute through these new gas distribution networks only natural gas and not biomethane or hydrogen. For this reason, we've got involved with biomethane and hydrogen, and just to add value to our investments by distributing renewable gas fuels. Since 2020, when we started exploring the renewable gas sector, we discovered that although in the rest of Europe there were some thousands of biomethane production units producing some thousands of gigawatt hours per year, in Greece, in our country, the concept of biomethane was unknown, almost unknown. There is no biomethane market in our country, and so there is no legislative or regulatory framework for biomethane or hydrogen market. In order to start with our initiatives for the development of the biomethane market, and we started with biomethane and not with hydrogen, because we consider that hydrogen is fuel not for the present or for the near future, but for the upper future. And so we started with initiatives for the creation of the biomethane market. And the first thing we have to investigate was, is there enough feedstock for the development of the market? In order to answer to this question, we collaborated with the team of the Center of Renewable Energy Sources, led by Mr. Zafiris, and we investigated the availability of manure, of agricultural wastes, and generally all organic wastes in 130 communities and municipalities in the areas where the company I work for is active. The results of this exercise were quite interesting and promising. In these regions, the feedstock available for biomethane production has a maximum theoretical energy content of something like 4,500 gigawatt hours thermal gigawatt hours per year. Assuming that we are able to harvest the 40% of this theoretical capacity, we are able to cover the supply of the 34 cities I mentioned before, where the new networks will be constructed. We were able to cover almost the 70% of the supply for those cities, the foreseen demand for the year 2026. This is the first result of our investigation. The second, quite interesting result of our exercise was that this raw materials, this feedstock, was highly dispersed in all the areas where we developed our study, and so it was rather very difficult to collect it and to transfer it to the biomethane production units, plants. This difficulty was not only due to the large geographical dispersion of the feedstock, but also to the lack of incentives for collecting and transporting them. Diving deeper into the geographical distribution of the feedstock, we concluded that the best capacity for the biomethane production plants falls between the 500 to 3 megawatts, thermal megawatts as a capacity, which means that the sector of the production of biomethane will suffer of high operating costs in relation to the bigger capacity plants. The difficulties in collecting the feedstock and the relative higher OPEX led us to the conclusion that for the development of biomethane market in our country, a price supporting mechanism like the feed-in tariff or the feed-in premium, sliding or not, is required. Considering the legislative and regulatory framework in our country, seems that the feed-in premium is the most appropriate supporting mechanism. One of the most important aspects is that the price of the supporting mechanism can be financed without any additional charge to the consumers. The compensation of the biomethane producer can be made of two parts. One part coming from the sale of biomethane in the market and getting as a reimbursement the price of the weighted average import price of natural gas, which is published by the authority every month. And the second portion can be made as a sum of the value of the carbon rights sold by the DAPEP, is the administrator of renewable energy sources and guarantees of origin, plus the 3.5% of the excise tax borne by natural gas, but not by the rest. In this way, biomethane will be sold at competitive prices with natural gas without any additional burden on the consumers. The second initiative we undertook is that we promoted two pilot plants for the production and the injection of the biomethane in existing gas networks as a blend with gas. We have already signed MOUs with two producers of biomethane, of biogas, and we agree that they will upgrade their plants to produce biomethane, and this biomethane will be injected in the existing networks of our company, one in the medium pressure industrial network and the other into the low pressure domestic distribution network. We presented these two pilot plans to the regulator, and we are waiting for their approval, their licensing. So practically in the sector of the biomethane and the development of the market of biomethane, we are ready to present our ideas, our proposals, and our approaches to the competent authorities of the country in order to kick off to the creation of the biomethane market in this country. But we haven't forgot the hydrogen. we have designed a pilot project for the hydrogen, consisting in converting natural gas into biomethane, into hydrogen, and this hydrogen is gonna be distributed by a special distribution network to several houses, a cluster of houses, 20, to cover by using hydrogen boilers to cover their heat needs. And the other quantity of hydrogen will be addressed to fuel cells where it will be converted in electricity to cover the electricity needs of the same cluster of houses. We call this pilot project Hydrogen Village, and this project, pilot project, has been qualified among other 150 out of 150 other projects to be financed by private investors, and we are waiting for their decision on next month. These are the achievements, a few words of our company on the sector of renewable on the sector of the distribution of renewable gas, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Theodore. And it's interesting to see what DEDA is doing in the terms of renewable gases. It looks like and I think actually this could be a question for everybody, is like investment is going to be key for all these projects to be timely, and also to create the necessary infrastructure. So I don't. Do you feel optimistic? I'll start with you first. Do you think that Bojana, the investment will be there, and and you know, in addition to, I mean, you mentioned the need for legislation, but in terms of, you know, private investors creating the necessary infrastructure in time?
For the private investors, indeed. So the regulation is a key. It's very important. So basically, you know, you need to take out all the bottlenecks that you're having for the moment. It is of a key importance. Of course, one of the things is that, you know, this missing infrastructure that we are seeing in relation to LNG. That's one thing. But there is also many still missing links when we talk about security of supply in Europe. It might be not that much, but still it's super important to be taken into consideration. So there it is expected to have a new PCI list, which is going to be focused only on security of supply. So those are indeed things that you will see a certain financial support towards the European, let's say, authorities, which is a good signal. But here it's very important to have a very proper, let's say, a foreseen of what is needed, because in this time of a crisis where you really take a very try to do necessary steps in relation on the short term, it's very important also to take into consideration not to finish afterwards with the infrastructure that is not going to be used.
Mm-hmm. Theodora, do you feel that you know, for DEDA, it's mature now to get investment in terms is there interest in renewable gases and especially biomethane?
Yeah, first of all, let me clarify that for the use of biomethane, the end consumer has not to invest anything, because the same appliances are used for biomethane. As far as the distribution companies is concerned, they have not to do any additional investment to receive biomethane unless the connection between the network and the biomethane plant. If the price of the biomethane is supported by a mechanism like the feed-in premium, then the investment of the private investors to invest in biomethane plants is secured. So I think that we have to resolve just the legislative questions, regulatory questions to kick off this market. All right. As far as the hydrogen is concerning, the end users has not to do any investment, additional investment, to convert their appliances if the blend of hydrogen is up to 20% with a mixture of with natural gas. So no change to the appliances. They can work with the same efficiency with a percentage of up to 20%. As far as the plastic network, no additional investments should be done because plastic pipes and plastic networks are okay for distributing blends of hydrogen up to 50%. Investments should be done in whatever is all the structure which is made of iron, metal, things like that. So I think that investments are required as far as the use of hydrogen, but no, the market can be, the market of the biomethane can be easily developed.
Okay. I got my little note that we have to wrap up in 3 minutes. So, Pandelis, any comment on this or any closing remarks?
Yes. I think it's quite early to, in my opinion, to discuss to give specific emphasis in renewable gases and hydrogen. This decade is a transitional decade. This is a decade that gas should play a significant role in order to achieve this transition and to achieve the goals of Fit for 55. So even though we are experiencing an energy crisis, natural gas still remains a player, still remains a key player. It's very early to draw safe conclusions on how hydrogen will be produced first. You need power to gas for green hydrogen. For blue hydrogen, it's a different procedure, a different process, which deals more, it's more industrial processes. So we need to see how hydrogen will be originated. Second, we need networks. Without networks, we cannot accommodate hydrogen. So the new networks or the existing networks need to be hydrogen ready. So this is, I'm getting back to my first comment, it's still early. Hydrogen and power to gas needs funding. Without funding, without adequate funding, it's still very expensive. It's 3 times more than natural gas. So it's still early to draw safe conclusions on how to invest on hydrogen. Plus, the regulatory framework, there is no regulatory framework governing the hydrogen sector. So it's still early to draw safe conclusions. And I'm referring particularly to investors and decision makers. So this decade is crucial for all these issues to be resolved in order for potential investors to invest safely on this kind of new technology, new gas, which is hydrogen. So I still believe, I firmly believe that natural gas will be a key player in the power production sector, in the household sector as well for heating purposes mainly. It could be also be utilized for other purposes as well. And I think there's adequate time to explore, which could be cooling, which we try generation, for example. And the further vast deployment of this kind of technologies could help the energy transition towards towards achieving the goals for Fit for 55 and later to lead to decarbonization. So I think, like, despite the energy crisis, despite the war in Ukraine, despite the rise in gas and oil prices, it's still a huge opportunity for the EU and for Europe as a whole to have a sound transition towards, a sound energy transition period during this particular decade in order to first achieve the goals, second, to have viable energy markets, and third, to get ready, to be prepared for the next stage, which is hydrogen, renewable fuels, etc. But we need investments, we need infrastructure, and I think we're going to be seeing that after 2028.
And on that note, I mean, yeah, definitely this is going to be a crucial decade. I want to thank my panelists. Thanks, Boyana Atsovsky, and Pantelis Voyagis and Theodore Terzopoulos for this very interesting discussion. And we're moving on to the next panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John Roberts, the floor is yours.